What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danelle Hallan, and I am back with another true crime video. But before I get into today's case, I want to encourage every single one of you to go over and follow me on TikTok. Unfortunately, I've had to create a new TikTok account, which has really sucked. True crime is huge on TikTok. It's a great way to reach a lot of people really fast. And my TikTok had over 50,000 followers. It was growing really well. I had so many different videos get insane views on there, and it was interesting because it was on a lot of cases that just didn't have the same views on YouTube. And so it was awesome to see these smaller cases or kind of niche cases reach a much larger audience. And unfortunately, that TikTok is no longer out there. So we've had to start from the ground up, and my team is working really hard to get it going again, get that momentum back. So it would mean a lot to me if you could help me build my TikTok back up to where it was. It is Danelle Hallan Official, along with all my other social media pages that I have linked down in the description box below. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and dive into today's case. And today we are going to be talking about a more recent story. Like, this is something that happened a couple of months ago, and I very specifically remember this happening and thinking it was one of the craziest things I'd ever heard, but it also kind of tickled something in the back of my brain because one of the very first videos that I ever created on this channel almost a decade ago at this point was about someone that went missing on a cruise. And I feel like, as someone who's always been interested in the ocean, you guys know I love the beach, I love boating, I've been on several cruises. Like, at one point in my life, I was determined to become a marine biologist. I've just had this fascination with the open ocean. And now that I've really been diving into true crime for years, seeing how crime plays out on the ocean specifically and all of the logistics about it has been incredibly intriguing to me. So I knew that I had to speak about this case. It's the heartbreaking story of Paige Bell, a young woman from South Africa who was out there living her dream at sea, you guys. She was working aboard a luxury super yacht, exploring the world. And for Paige, this wasn't just a job for her. You know, it was everything she had worked for. She was not even 21 years old yet. But unfortunately, what was supposed to be this, flourishing young adult life filled with promise and adventure would end in unimaginable tragedy. One that not only devastated her loved ones, but also ended up shaking up an entire global industry. So let's get right into the details. Paige Bell was born on July 14th, 2004 to her parents Michelle and John Bell in KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. And she grew up near Durban and attended Hillcrest High School, where she ended up graduating in 2022. Friends and teachers of Paige's remembered her as being warm and bubbly, full of life. She was kind of the person that could walk into a room and instantly lift everyone's spirits. She always had the biggest smile on her face, the most optimistic. One former classmate described her as, quote, incredibly special. She always put everyone else first and made sure that everyone felt seen and heard and cared for. Even as a teenager, Paige was really driven and she was really adventurous. She loved traveling. She loved meeting new people. She loved helping others. And so she knew from a pretty young age that she would end up in the world of hospitality. And that dream ended up taking shape in the form of super yachts, those magnificent floating palace equivalents that are really catered to the ultra wealthy. And so the idea of seeing the world while working seemed like a dream come true to her. And I feel like for so many people, that's such a luxurious, amazing life to consider living, but it's not a possibility for majority of people. And so what is the second best? I mean, yeah, you're definitely going to be working long hours. It's definitely a challenging job, but you still get to see all of these beautiful places. You get to experience things that you probably wouldn't otherwise. So this was huge for Paige. Now, immediately after high school, she wasted no time pursuing this career. She went through formal yachting training, courses that prepared her for life at sea as a stewardess. And by 2023, she was already working aboard luxury yachts. And her first big opportunity came on a vessel called Sweet Emotion. It was a 39-meter motor yacht that was known for high-end charters and elite clientele. I feel like so many of us probably watch Below Deck or at least follow people on social media that work as stewardesses. And it's really a super intriguing thing to watch. And so she didn't just kind of tiptoe into this career. She really dove in headfirst with some of the most elite charters out there. Right away, Paige stood out to all of her crewmates. They said that she wasn't just part of the team, she legitimately became like family, which is something that tends to be kind of unavoidable in these situations because you are on these yachts for extended periods, months at a time. You're in really close quarters, oftentimes sharing spaces with crewmates. Usually bunks are together. I mean, you literally cannot get out of each other's space. And Paige kind of made that easy. One stewardess said Paige was more than a teammate. She was family. Her radiant spirit, infectious laughter, and boundless compassion made an unforgettable impact on everyone lucky enough to know her. Whether it was long days at sea or quiet moments under the stars, she brought light and warmth wherever she went. It was so clear to everyone that Paige had found her calling. Like she had been her entire childhood and teenage years, she was such a positive, optimistic, happy-go-lucky person. And if you've ever been in a situation where you have to work that closely to people, that's exactly the kind of person that you want to work with. Could you imagine having to go into cramped, close-quarter spaces every single day with a bunch of people with terrible attitudes, pessimists? So Paige was truly a gem to so many of these crew members. Now, she spent the 2024 season aboard Sweet Emotion. She was gaining invaluable experience, and she was also proving herself to be both professional and dependable. And by December of that year, she decided to leave that yacht to explore new opportunities and continue climbing in her career. And that is a very common thing for a lot of the yacht stewardesses to do because it just gives them a change of pace, different scenery. And so at just 20 years old at this point, Paige was already starting to build a strong reputation in an industry where reputation is very important. And not just that, but connections and reliability mean everything. And she was making her mark. She was standing out as someone that did their job amazing, lifted team spirits. I mean, she made sure morale was high. And so that meant everything on these yachts would go that much smoother. So when 2025 arrived, Paige was ready for her next chapter. And that opportunity came aboard the Far From It, which is a 43-meter luxury motor yacht built by Richmond Yachts. And you guys, this vessel is stunning. It had polished teak decks, like marble interior. The cabins are designed for the world's wealthiest travelers, and Far From It operates as a charter yacht. So it would cruise to exclusive destinations like the Bahamas and Harbor Island, which is like a play place for millionaires and billionaires. And it would also stop at other paradise ports scattered all across the Caribbean. And so this boat in specific had a crew of 8, and the yacht would accommodate about 12 guests in its 6 cabins. And it came at the hefty cost of $140,000 to $165,000 a week. So this was quite the hell of a boat to be working on. And so she ended up joining Far From It as a junior stewardess under Captain Greg Love, who later described her arrival as a breath of fresh air for the entire crew. She slid straight into their family like she'd always belonged, which came as no surprise to anyone that knew Paige. Her energy was contagious, and she quickly earned the trust and admiration of the entire crew. Now, by mid-2025, after a few months working on Far From It, Paige's hard work was paying off. Captain Love revealed that he was beginning to consider her for a promotion, something that she was so proud of. He recalled sitting down with her just weeks before tragedy struck to discuss her possible new role. And Paige was so excited about the chance to take on more responsibility. She was moving up really fast in the ranks, and she told him that she was ready. She was ready to prove herself, to grow, to keep moving forward in a career that she loved. And Captain Love even promised that when the time came, he would give her his own set of officers' epaulettes, which is a huge symbol of respect in the marine world. She legitimately came into this career like a tornado, just swirling through, getting the job done, climbing ladders, and making such a mark along her way. And so those that knew Paige said that this was one of the happiest times of her life. She was thriving. She was exploring all these exotic locations, and she was also planning to fly home soon to celebrate her 21st birthday with her family on July 14th, 2025. It seemed like everything that she had dreamed of as a teenager was finally coming through, and all before her 21st birthday. This really did seem like the pinnacle of her young career, but unfortunately, behind those glossy photos of sunsets and all the champagne toasts and all the money, the world of luxury yachting carries a much darker side that few outsiders ever see. Now, for those that are working at sea on these yachts, isolation is not just physical, It's emotional, okay? We're talking about very, very long days away from family. You're often in really close quarters, like I've already spoken about, with people that you barely know and you might not get along with. And you have to kind of trust that everyone on board will look out for each other. And so this isn't the sanitized version of yachting that so many people imagine. This is a world that behind everything is built on image, okay? We're talking wealthy guests, impeccable service, like everything has to be polished and perfect, or the money doesn't flow in. And so beneath all that perfection are people that are working under insanely immense pressure. There's no HR departments that are floating out in the middle of the ocean, all right? There's no unions on these private vessels, and there is very little, if any, oversight beyond the captain's authority on each ship. And so when things go wrong on these super yachts, help can be very far away, or it can be essentially non-existent. When I did a little digging into crime on super yachts and things that are reported, YachtCrewHelp ended up showing that there was a 21% increase in calls related to harassment and violence in 2024 alone, with most of those being from women. And earlier studies found that 65% of yacht crew had witnessed sexual harassment on board, and nearly 40% said that they'd experienced unwanted physical contact. So you can see that this can be a very challenging place to work, which I feel like is not really any surprise given the circumstances. You've got a lot of sick people out there in the world, and when you put them in the middle of nowhere where there's essentially no rules and it's the Wild West, the worst tends to come out in people. And unfortunately, this was something that Paige had already experienced on one of the previous vessels that Paige had been on. She ended up being quietly relocated because she reported unwanted advances from her captain. And so, as I said, there's already not much oversight on these yachts. But when it's the captain themselves, the person that's supposed to be safeguarding all of the crew members, that's the one harassing you, I can't even begin to imagine what it felt like for Paige to be out in the middle of the ocean with someone who's harassing you and no way to get away from them. And so thankfully, she was able to be moved. She was transferred to Fort Lauderdale. But this really shows immediately how unprotected yacht workers really are, because despite the facts there were these complaints against this captain, there was no formal inquiry. There was no accountability. There was just silence, because in the super yachting world, the show must go on. And unfortunately, this was not a one-off thing for Paige. On another yacht that Paige had been working on, there was another situation involving a crew member, this time specifically an engineer. And yet again, Paige voiced discomfort about things this engineer was saying to her and doing to her that made her feel uneasy. It was just more harassment from a man that she didn't want. And so I'm not sure who she brought this information to, whether it was the captain or there was someone else she was able to go to, but this man ultimately received a slap on the wrist. He was warned and then allowed to continue working. And it sounds like Paige continued working alongside this man. And so there's just this constant pattern of warnings being dismissed and behavior being ignored, because once again, the show must go on. And that's the huge problem in the super yachting industry. This culture of silence is not at all new, you guys. The super yacht world is enormous, okay? There's nearly 6,000 vessels that operate globally, but there's not a single universal system for reporting crimes or verifying crew backgrounds, you guys. Like, there's not even a guarantee these crew members have had background checks. Every single yacht out there, all 6,000 plus of them, follows the laws of their flag state, and their flag states could be located anywhere in the world where the rules and enforcement vary dramatically. So there is no consistent expectation for any of these vessels floating around in the ocean. And unfortunately, you have all of these people that see this beautiful job that allows you so many opportunities, and they head out there. They're placed on several different ships over their career, and there's no telling where those ships came from, who's running them, if that person cares, if they're a good person, if they're not. And according to statistics, it's just not doing great things for these crew members. Now, there's one crew advocate, Amy Ira, who has apparently spent years trying to change this culture where no one says anything because heaven forbid the money slow down. She's spoken openly about how the yachting industry really lacks a zero tolerance policy for things like harassment or misconduct. And if you remember any of the statistics that I just said, that's a huge problem on these yachts. She said, quote, "There are no proper reporting structures, no oversight. You are on your own out there." The yachting world is legitimately like like the Wild West. You never know what rules you're going to be following on whichever boat you went on, and you never know who's going to be working beside you. And unfortunately, this was something Paige was experiencing time and time again. And the yachting world, honestly, reminds me so much of Hollywood because it's very intertwined. There's so many different stewards working for these larger companies that place them on these charter boats. And again, it's like yacht musical chairs. And so a lot of people that end up witnessing these different things or experiencing these different things on these yachts don't file a complaint because they're worried they're going to be blacklisted, that they'll be labeled as a troublemaker, and they'll never land a good job again on any boats. And that will wipe out their whole career. People are scared to come forward. They're scared to speak up. They're scared that they're inevitably going to also become a target one day. But something has got to give, because what ended up happening to Paige shows you exactly what happens when those red flags go unheeded, when people fail to speak up. Paige loved her work. She followed the rules. She believed that her professionalism would protect her. That belief ended up being tested in the most devastating way possible. So that brings us to July 3rd, 2025. Far From It was docked near Harbor Island in the Bahamas, which I kind of dabbled in at the beginning of this video, but this place is known for like beautiful waters. There's all these pastel colored cottages. It's just like a rich man's playground. And a lot of people have dreams to eventually be able to boat there, have one of these super yachts chartered there, have a house along the ocean there. And so this is a really sought out, well-known place to go. And the morning had been routine. Guests, from my understanding, were off of the vessel, and the crew was focused on maintenance and cleaning. And so Paige, who was always incredibly dedicated, was still on duty in her uniform, ready for any task. And for her, even these quiet dock days were a huge part of the job. It was just another opportunity to prove herself. And after having that huge conversation with Captain Love and the idea of there being a promotion, she didn't want to miss a single step. So you could often find her buried into her work, trying to go above and beyond. And so it was strange by early afternoon when crew members started to notice that Paige hadn't checked in for a while, and all of her radio calls were going unanswered. And at first, no one seemed to panic. Maybe she had just stepped away for a moment. Maybe she went to grab more supplies. But as minutes passed and there was still no sign of her, that uneasy feeling began to grow, because we're talking about a boat here that is big in terms of boats, but when it comes to a place someone could easily get lost, not really so much. And so the crew started to search the decks, the cabins, the galley, calling out her name, but there was no response. Now, shortly after this, by around 1 p.m., the Royal Bahama Police Force was notified, and officers quickly boarded the yacht at the harbor to begin their search. And when they reached the lower deck of the ship, deep in the yacht's engine room, they made a discovery that would haunt everyone on board. Paige ended up being found unresponsive, surrounded by signs of a violent struggle. And this was an area that she had no reason at all to be in. It was the engine room, okay? It was hot and loud, filled with machinery. Like, there was nothing down there that she would be able to do. There was barely even enough space for people to be down there other than the engineer. So that in and of itself was a red flag. But also, she had devastating injuries. Paige had deep wounds to her neck and her torso. She also had clear defensive injuries on her arms and her hands, which immediately showed authorities that she had fought desperately to survive. This had been an attack, and authorities were fairly certain they knew who was behind it, because laying right next to Paige was a male crew member, and he too was critically injured. And when police took a closer look, they realized that he was injured from what they believed were self-inflicted wounds. Now, this man was alive, barely. He was clinging to life, but Paige, unfortunately, was not. Officers immediately locked down the yacht, and Harbor Island's usually peaceful harbor transformed into a crime scene. There was police tape stretched across the dock, armed officers were guarding the walkway, and investigators and forensic teams began documenting the evidence. And a doctor ultimately ended up coming on board and pronouncing Paige as deceased. For other crew members, people who had lived and worked with Paige, spent day in and day out, like literally no moments apart, the shock of of finding this in the engine room of the ship was indescribable, because I think everyone so genuinely knew exactly what this meant. The engine room could only be accessed through narrow metal corridors all the way in the bottom of the ship, and there were secure hatches. And so investigators believe that Paige may have been lured down there or forced down there. Like, there was legitimately no reason for her to go down there. And every single person that worked with her on that yacht knew that. So without even having all of the pieces, what they did have showed a nightmare. While authorities chose their words very carefully, they did share a few details with the media. They issued a brief statement confirming that this was in fact a homicide investigation. Foul play was suspected, obviously, but they didn't release the identity of the man found beside Paige or any solid indication of his possible involvement. But I think everyone kind of knew that he likely had everything to do with what happened to Paige. Her case was immediately sealed, with police citing it was an ongoing investigation, and even the crew's families were struggling to get answers. Media inquiries were met with silence. And obviously, being a beautiful young woman who was murdered on this top-of-the-line super yacht, news of that spread quick and people wanted answers. Paige had been brutally killed just 11 days before her 21st birthday, a celebration that she was counting down to. She was about to fly back home and spend time in South Africa, in Durban, surrounded by her friends and family. She already had the travel plans arranged. She had been excitedly talking to her mom about the red velvet cake that she promised to make. And instead of welcoming her home, her loved ones were about to be receiving the kind of news that every parent fears most. That birthday trip would never come, and Paige's promising, beautiful career that she was working so hard for had been stopped in its tracks. As word of Paige's death spread, shock was rippling through the marina and beyond, because violence like this was virtually unheard of in the yachting world. Everyone sees the beauty and the excitement and the shine and the glimmer of it all, and they completely fail to see the dark things that happen behind the scenes. And now I've completely forgot to look up statistics on deaths on super yachts, but what Amy Iris said was that she had been in this industry for years, and that was definitely a first. But again, harassment and things that could eventually lead to this were not. And one of the people that Paige had complained about was an engineer. Now, authorities have not confirmed if this complaint is about the same engineer that was found near her body, but it does seem to be insinuated in a handful of personal statements from those close to the case. Now, within hours, news ended up reaching Durban. Paige's parents, Michelle and John, released a statement saying, quote, "It's with broken hearts that we share the devastating news that our beautiful Paige's life was brutally taken from us. We will leave no stone unturned until the guilty is brought to justice." A verified GoFundMe ended up being launched by her former crew members, people from Sweet Emotion, to try and support travel expenses and legal costs for Paige's family, because they were now having to not just navigate the aftermath of their daughter's death, but they're in South Africa and she's all the way in the Bahamas. So as Paige's family made all of the arrangements, the information slowly started to trickle out. Now, that man found beside Paige that was discovered critically injured in the engine room that had somehow survived had been immediately transported to Princess Margaret Hospital in Nassau under armed police escort. And for a while, the identity of this crew member was withheld, but eventually officials named him as Brigito Munoz, a 39-year-old engineer serving aboard far from it. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they looked at all of the evidence, it became very clear to them that no outsiders had come aboard and there were no signs of forced entry. So it wasn't like some random person decided to board this yacht, target one of the crew members, and this man hurt himself trying to save her. Instead, the picture that was being painted was that this man potentially was behind this entire attack, that this tragedy had unfolded entirely within the confines of the yacht itself, among these people who had lived and worked beside each other every single day for months at this point. Authorities ended up revealing that Brigito Munoz likely had lured Paige down or forced her down to this engine room and attempted to assault her. I've seen across a few different news sources, but I'm not able to confirm this whatsoever, that her clothing had been messed up as if someone was trying to undress her, but likely in the process of whatever was going on, Paige ended up being killed. And it's likely that when this man realized that, he tried to end his own life to escape the consequences of his own actions. Now, this revelation sent shockwaves through the tight-knit yachting community, raising a lot of uncomfortable questions about safety and accountability, and again, an industry that's usually shielded by silence. This murder had happened in the noisiest part of the yacht that nobody ever goes to. It felt so deliberate. And if it was in fact the same engineer that she had complained about from before, that would be even more upsetting. But also, a lot of people online started to point out that Paige had fought back hard. She had fought to save her own life. And while that was definitely a loud part of the ship, a lot of people started to question, based on this history of silence in the industry, whether nobody truly heard what happened, or maybe did some of the crew members hear something and instead stuck to the code of silence that the industry is known for. Now, obviously, I can't confirm any of that, and I would like to think that people genuinely just had no idea what was going down in that room. But regardless, to think about the fact that Paige, this 20-year-old girl who is just trying to live her life and find a place for herself and grow in her career, was possibly dragged down to the bottom of the ship and a terrifying area of the ship. The fact that she had been attacked down there in the heat and the noise by some man that she did not know, and somehow nobody noticed it, is so devastating. Meanwhile, Paige's parents arrived in the Bahamas to start working through the painful process of bringing her home, something that no parent should ever have to do. They spent their days navigating foreign procedures and paperwork and clinging to one another for strength as they waited for permission to see her one last time and hop on a plane to take her back to her friends and family. According to official records, Paige was cremated in Nassau before her ashes were returned to Durban. When her family finally stepped off the plane in Durban, they were met with an outpouring of love, and so that words honestly can hardly describe. There were hundreds of people gathered at Hillcrest High, where Paige attended high school. They had candles in hand. In the night, friends and family and classmates shared stories of this girl who never failed to make them laugh. Paige's family ended up requesting that on what would have been her 21st birthday, a time where she should have been celebrating, was supposed to be with her family, everyone eat a slice of red velvet cake in her honor, something that she never got the chance to do herself. So many people around the world were devastated about what happened to Paige, and they were writing inspiring tributes, and the hashtag Red Velvet for Paige began to trend. Captain Greg Love, still reeling from the loss of one of his own, traveled all the way from the Caribbean to attend Paige's memorial. He stood in front of her family and ended up presenting them with the officer's epaulettes that he had once promised Paige, a symbol of the career that she was supposed to have. He said, quote, "She was one of the good ones. She was family." The investigation remained ongoing, but as days turned into weeks, one thing became painfully clear. While the world was searching for answers, the crew, who had once been Paige's second family, were left haunted by what happened on board that day, because for them, the sea was supposed to represent a place of freedom and adventure, and now it was never going to feel the same again. And all of these years, all of this time where everyone turned a cheek to the violence and the harassment and all of these things that tended to happen on these super yachts, seeing it progress to something like a horrific murder, I think really shocked a lot of people. And so they knew they could no longer ignore these things. Paige's death ignited a reckoning within the superyacht industry, because for so long misconduct had been brushed aside or handled internally, but now the consequences could no longer be ignored because things had gone beyond that. The nonstop harassment and sexual assaults and all of that was happening on the yachts had taken it a step further. That same yacht broker, Amy Ara, launched the Paige Bell Pledge, which is a campaign calling for background checks and zero-tolerance harassment policies on all charter vessels, something that you would assume would already be in place, but unfortunately is just not. Recruiter Jess Frost also renewed her long-standing petition for stricter safety protocols, and within days, it ended up gathering thousands of signatures. Some management companies began implementing these reporting systems, like confidential misconduct systems, so that was a huge step toward accountability, but not everyone wanted to participate. For the first time ever, crew members who had stayed silent for years began to speak up. Social media flooded with accounts from other yacht workers, stewards, deckhands, chefs, all sharing eerily similar experiences of harassment, assault, and even retaliation, which is terrifying. Many of them admitted that they had been too afraid to come forward, but Paige's story had given them courage. And so suddenly, this facade of glamour that had defined the superyacht world was cracking wide open. And I think for the first time ever, a lot of people were really starting to pay attention to the mess that lies out there in the open ocean. Many yachts are registered or flagged in countries where there's limited oversight, and this is specifically done so that the people that own these yachts can get tax breaks, and so there's looser regulations that they don't have to follow. And these flags of convenience create, as you probably guess, serious problems for justice. A yacht can be owned by a company and, let's say, the United States. It can be managed in another, it can be flagged in another, employed by a multinational crew, and then docked in a completely different jurisdiction. And so you can see how this would create massive delays and gaps in accountability. And so witnesses can be scattered across continents. Evidence usually has to be transported through customs. The lack of a centralized maritime criminal court leaves cases adrift. According to maritime law experts, crimes on private yachts take years, if not decades, to fully resolve, if they're ever even resolved at all. Because when tragedy strikes on these yachts, it's unclear who is responsible for investigating. And this is something that we've already talked about time and time again when I have spoken about crimes that happen on cruise ships. It's not that everyone is fighting to take the case. No one wants to take it. No one wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And when you add lack of oversight to that on these smaller superyacht vessels, that often means that it remains that way. Families face delays, confusion, and years of waiting for closure. So the Bahamas, where Paige's case falls, has jurisdiction because far from it was a yacht that was flagged there. But the owners and the management company are registered in other countries. And again, most of the crew, including Paige, were foreign nationals. Despite those complications, it does seem that authorities in the Bahamas appear to be taking Paige's case head on. There doesn't seem to be any sort of fight over whose jurisdiction it is, but that doesn't mean there's still not going to be issues, because even the most committed investigators often find themselves fighting these invisible walls. We've got layers of paperwork, jurisdictional hurdles, international delays, and that's why what happened next mattered so much. The outrage that followed wasn't just about what happened to Paige, it was about what her case revealed. There is this horrific side to super yachting and just boating in general that puts so many people at risk. And when the worst of the worst happens, these victims are failed more often than not. According to the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, maritime crimes, including assault and homicide, are among the most underreported in the world. And so now Paige's family is facing this painful reality of navigating a system from thousands of miles away. Now, in the months since Paige's death, her case has remained active within the Bahamian court system, and the man accused of her murder, engineer Brigito Munoz, is currently in custody awaiting trial, with his next court appearance scheduled for late November 2025. So that should be coming up soon. And while authorities continue to prepare the case, I feel like it's already highlighting just how slow maritime justice can be, because Brigito Munoz is from Mexico. And so we've got the accused from Mexico, the victim from South Africa, the flag of the ship in the Bahamas, the management in another country, the owners in another. So every single hearing that Brigito has to be involved in, there's coordination between all of those different officials and representatives. It's a logistical and emotional nightmare. And this is even in a scenario where it's like the best of the best here. We've got an investigating agency that actually cares and is stepping up to the plate. But even then, that is just one of the many hurdles that exist when it comes to getting maritime justice. And so for Michelle and John Bell, this wait for justice is an unbearable limbo. So they hope that Paige's case will expose all of the flaws in how crimes are investigated and prosecuted. Her father has said, quote, "It shouldn't take tragedy for safety to become a priority." Some agencies have started to tighten background checks. Again, some have implemented confidential reporting systems, and a few yacht owners have begun hosting harassment prevention training. But still not everyone seems willing to face what's happening. There are some yacht owners and agencies that are just continuing on business as usual, choosing to preserve the industry's polished image rather than confront a very real problem, because there's so many loopholes that it is literally that easy for them to ignore. Paige's sister Chelsea has quietly stepped forward as well as an advocate for crew safety. She's determined to make sure that her sister's story leads to lasting reform. She's been in contact with several different organizations speaking about the importance of transparency and mental health resources for workers at sea. Had some of these things been in place, Paige might still be here today. What if Brigito Munoz had a history of assaulting women and no one knew about it because they never did a background check? These crews could be filled with people with horrendous backgrounds just looking for the perfect place to further commit their crimes, knowing they won't be prosecuted for them. And that is a terrifying reality and also a very, very real one. Paige did everything right. She worked hard. She believed in the good in people, but that was not enough to protect her. And that truth should weigh very heavily on an industry that's built on luxury and trust. They have the ability to put safeguards in place, so it's just about the question now of why won't they? Paige's story is so hard to hear, and not just because of how she died, but because of how painfully familiar it is for so many in this industry. Her death wasn't just a failure of one person, it was a failure of an entire system that let her down at every single turn. A system that unfortunately ends up rewarding silence, overlooks red flags, and prioritizes reputation over safety. And that's what makes this so devastating, because the reality is this could have been anyone, and it still could be anyone. Paige was just starting out her life. She wanted to see the world, to experience beauty and freedom, and she chose a path that should have given her exactly that. And instead, she was taken advantage of. She was left unprotected in an industry that really should have done better. And at this point, there's no telling how long it's going to take her family to get justice, if there even is justice at all. I talk so much on this channel about legislative changes and how we need to fight for all of these different things to keep ourselves safe. And seeing this case, I think it hit me so hard because there's not a whole lot of focus out there on the lack of maritime laws, on the lack of protection for people that work these high-risk jobs. And so a lot of these people that are speaking out are saying, why on earth are there not serious regulations here? This should be considered a high-risk job just given the nature of it. There are background checks for people that work as stewards on airplanes. Why is it not required for anyone who steps foot on a ship? I am heartbroken for Paige's family. I am heartbroken for every single one of her crewmates that now have to question their own safety even more than they already did. And I genuinely hope that a lot of these management companies and these charter companies and these yacht owners end up deciding to make a change for better, to protect these people, because this is not an easy job. These people work under such immense pressure all of the time, all to create a great environment for people paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet their own safety is not even anywhere near a top priority, even though they're the ones creating this experience from the ground up. Of course, these yachts are nice, they're beautiful, but what would they be without the crew? If every single one of these crew members stepped off the boat, would anyone pay $150,000 for a week-long trip on one? Something tells me probably not. So maybe it's about time that the crew on these ships are taken a little bit more seriously and protected the way that they should be, because this entire industry wouldn't exist without them. And even if you've never stepped foot on a boat before and have no plans of ever doing so, there's a lot of people out there that rely on this for their job. This is what they want to do with their life. It's their career. It's what they love. And when you already have an industry that would rather sweep things under the rug than talk about it, they're going to heavily rely on people like you and I, just everyday people, giving a crap about what's happening, even if it's not directly impacting us. So make sure to share this story. Make sure to share all of the efforts of those trying to put these safeguards in place. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Paige's story. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below so that you can become a part of the Hallan fam, so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.